Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's tutorial I'll be showing you how to make this pinafore dress. The name of the fabric I used is called a crepe fabric, and I made use of 2 yards. For a plus size person, you should make use of 3 yards. So let's get started. The first step is to make the upper part of this dress. So this fabric here is folded into two and it will be for the front piece of the dress. I went ahead to roll the starting line, and this starting line will serve as a shoulder line. On the starting line, I placed my tape to mark the neck width, which is 3.5 inches. For a plus size person, you should mark 4 inches. While the neck depth is 1 inch, and I'll connect the 2 points together to form a curved neckline. The next step is to divide your shoulder measurement into two. Mine is 7 inches, so I placed it exactly on 7 inches. Now from this point, I placed my tape below that point to mark 1 inch and connected the point to the neck width, and this will form the shoulder slope for this dress. Now from the tip of the shoulder slope, I placed my tape vertically downwards to mark my armhole circumference divided by 2. To connect both points together, the next step is to extend this point to form a new line, and this new line is called the bust line. Now to get the armhole curve, I placed my tape on the armhole line to mark the midpoint and connected this midpoint to the bust line using my curved ruler. The next step is to mark the waistline. My waistline is 16 inches. I added 1 inch sewing allowance to the bottom, which made it 17 inches altogether. Now on the bust line, I placed my bust circumference divided by 4 plus 2 inches sewing allowance to the side. On the waistline, I placed my waist circumference divided by 4. And since I'd be including a waist dart, I added 1 inch allowance for the darts. Now I went ahead to add the 2 inches sewing allowance by the side to connect this point to the bust circumference. The next step is to add half inch sewing allowance to the top of the shoulder slope. So I'll go ahead to trim the sides. The next step is to cut the back piece. Now I folded this fabric into two and placed the front piece directly on it, keeping a distance of 2 inches on this side, which will serve as a zipper allowance. Now I went ahead to trace out the neckline and to also trim out the neckline as well. The next step is to shape the zipper allowance so that after attaching the zipper to the dress, the zipper would be properly relaxed. And to do this, on this side of the zipper allowance, I would mark 1 inch to connect it to the top of the zipper allowance as shown, and this would form a slant line. Now I'll go ahead to trim it out. Alright guys, so the next step is to trim out the neckline for the front piece alone, and this depends on how wide you want the opening to be at the front. So this is the measurements I would be working with. If you want it to be smaller than mine, then you should reduce your measurements. Now from the bottom of the waistline, I placed my tape upward on the center of the fold to mark 4 inches, and this would be the neck depth. Now I connected the neck width to the neck depth to create a rectangular shape. Now I used the curved part of my ruler to connect these 2 points together. The next step is to trim out the neckline. The next step is to mark the waist dart. I divided my nipple distance into two and added half-inch sewing allowance to that, which made it 3 inches altogether. Now I marked 3 inches from this center of the fold. The next thing I did was to notch this point I marked on both the front piece and the back piece, and this will guide me in making my darts. Now the length of the darts for the front piece should be 2.5 inches, and the length of the darts for the back piece should be 10 inches. Alright, the next step is to place both the front piece and the back piece separately on the lining to cut out exactly the same shape. But for this pinafore style, it's always preferable to use the same material to cut out the lining as well. Now for the skirt part of this dress, I folded this fabric into two, and this would be the front piece of the skirt. So the first thing I did was to rule a starting line, and this line will serve as the waistline for this skirt. Now recall that the length of the upper part is 16 inches. This simply means I will deduct that 16 inches from the waistline of the skirt. The next step is to mark my hip line. My hip line is 25 inches. And the full length of my dress is 39 inches. I added extra 2 inches allowance to the hem, which made it 41 inches in total. On the waistline, I placed my waist circumference divided by 4, and I added extra 1 inch allowance for the waist dart, and I added extra 2 inches sewing allowance to the side. Now on the hip line, I will divide my hip circumference divided by 4 and added extra 2 inch allowance to the side to connect the hip circumference to the waist circumference as shown. Now to get the hem circumference, I placed my tape on the hip line with the sewing allowance included. This is 12 inches. So I'm going to subtract 1.5 inches from that, and that would be 10.5 inches. Now I connected the hem circumference to the hip circumference as shown. The next step is to add 1 inch sewing allowance to the top of the waistline. Now I'll go ahead to trim the edges. The next step is to place the front piece on a folded fabric to cut out the back piece. So placing the front piece on the back piece, I kept a distance of 2 inches by the side, which will serve as the zipper allowance. So on this side of the waistline, I marked 1 inch, and on the hip line, I marked 1.5 inches, and on the hem line, I marked 1.5 inches as well to connect all 3 points together. So the next thing I did here was to trim out the sides following the direction of the choke. Now I notched the zipper allowance at the top and at the bottom. The next step is to mark the waist dart. Since I marked 3 inches on the waist dart for the upper part, I'll also place my tape from this fold to mark 3 inches as well, and then notch the darts. So let's get started with the stitching. This is the front piece, and I placed the lining directly on the main fabric, right side facing each other. Now I'll take this to the sewing machine to stitch the neckline following the direction of the choke by ½ inch. On getting to this point of this sharp V, I would raise the machine footer to continue stitching. After stitching the neckline, I notched the seam allowance on the neckline all through. After notching, I flipped the fabric to the right side, took this to the ironing board to iron the neckline properly. After the neckline is properly ironed, you'd have it looking this way. Now for the back piece, I would place the lining directly on the main fabric, right side to right side facing each other. I took this to the sewing machine to stitch the neckline by ½ inch following the direction of the choke. After stitching the neckline, I also top stitched the neckline. Now the next step is to attach the shoulder of the front piece to the shoulder of the back piece. To do this, I will place the right side of the shoulders to face each other, making sure that the shoulder joining aligns together. I would go ahead to pin. After pinning, I would stitch the shoulders together by half inch. The next step is to stitch the shoulder of the back piece to the other side of the front piece as well, making sure that the joining on the shoulder aligns together. Now I would also stitch by half inch as well. After stitching the shoulders together, you should have it looking this way. Now the next step is to take this to the sewing machine to stitch the armhole by half inch, following the direction of the chalk, and to also stitch the sides by half inch, and to stitch the side by half inch, and to also stitch the zipper allowance by half inch. Now on this other side, I'll also stitch the armhole by half inch as well, and to stitch the sides by half inch, and to stitch the zipper allowance here by half inch. After all sides has been stitched, I would notch the armhole, and to also notch the other side of the armhole as well because it has a curved edges. The next step is to turn the fabric to the right side, and to do this I would place my hand inside the front piece so I can easily pass the back piece through the shoulder joining. Alright guys, so I'll take this to my ironing board to iron the sides properly. This is the front piece of the top, and recall that I already marked it that the fabric is black, so you might not really see that, so that's the reason why I made that markings. Now on this side of the dart, I'm going to fold the fabric here into two, and then mark a dart length of 2.5 inches to secure the dart by half inch. I'll do the same on this other side as well. Now for the back piece, this is where I notched, so I'm going to fold the fabric from this line to mark a dart length of 10 inches, and to secure it following the direction of the chalk. Now on this other side, I would also mark the point I notched, fold it into two here, and mark in that length of 10 inches as well, to stitch by half inch following the direction of the chalk. Now after all that has been secured, you'd have it looking this way. The next step is on how to make the skirt. So this is the front piece of the skirt. You can decide to leave it this way or make a slit at the bottom. To make the slit at the bottom, I placed my tape from the fold here to mark 3.5 inches. Now I had to open this up because I used that point as a reference. So I remarked it on the right side of the fabric. So take note that this is the waist. Alright. On this point I marked for the slit, I would place my tape to mark the length of the slit to 6 inches. Now on the bottom of the slit, I marked 1/4 inch on both sides and connected it to the top of the slit. Now I'll go ahead to trim out the slit opening. To make a facing for the slit, I place this fabric below the slit to trim out exactly the same shape. Now I place the facing on the right side of the fabric to stitch the edges by half inch following the direction of the chalk. After stitching the facing, you should notch the edges and then flip the facing inward. Then you take this to the ironing board to iron the facing properly. Now for the waist that on this point I notched, I would fold it directly from here to mark a dart length of 5 inches. So here I'll be making a triangular dart by half inch, and on this other side of the dart I notched, I would also mark a length of 5 inches to make the waist dart as well. So this is the back piece of the skirt. I would also be making a waist dart. On this point I notched, I would fold it into two to mark a length of 5 inches as well. Take this to the sewing machine to stitch the dart by half inch and to also mark a length of 5 inches and to stitch the dart by half inch as well. So obviously I've stitched the waist dart for the skirt. Now I'll place the right side of the front piece directly on the right side of the skirt, making sure that the waist dart aligns with each other, and then stitching together by 1 inch. After stitching here, you would notice that the waistline for the skirt is a bit wider than the waistline for the top, and the reason is because I didn't use a lining on the skirt. So if you are using a lining, the sides will be surely equal. My reason for not using a lining is because the fabric is a bit stretching, so I want it to be stretching on the skirt side. All right, so this is the back piece. I'm going to place the back piece on each other, and on the lower part of the zipper allowance I marked half inch and connected this point to the waistline as shown, and this will form a slant line. So the reason I did this is to eliminate any fold that would be caused due to the butts at the back. So this little tip here would always make you have a properly relaxed zipper. So this is one side of the skirt. I would make sure that the dart aligns and then place it right side to right side to stitch by 1 inch as well. I'll go ahead to do the same for the second side of the skirt, making sure that the dart aligns together, then placing it directly on the waistline right side to stitch by 1 inch as well. So once you've attached the waistline, on the wrong side of the front piece, you should place your bust circumference divided by 2, your waist circumference divided by 2, and then you connect the 2 points together. Now I'll go ahead to divide my hip circumference by 2 to place it directly on the hip line as shown, and to also connect the hip circumference to the waist circumference. Now to get the M circumference, I placed my tape on the hip circumference. Here I have 19 inches. I'll deduct 2 inches from that, and that will be 17 inches. Now I went ahead to mark 17 inches for the M circumference. The next step is to place the front piece directly on the back piece, right side of the fabric facing each other. Now I took this to my sewing machine to stitch the sides following the direction of the chalk. The next step is to place an hemming gum below the slit facing. Then take this to the ironing board to iron it properly. Alright, after the slit has been properly ironed, the next step is to place the zipper allowance on the center back directly on each other. From the bottom of the zipper allowance, I want the length of my slit to be 9 inches. And from the top of the zipper allowance vertically downwards, I want the length of the zipper opening to be 22 inches. Now I'll take this to the sewing machine to make a straight stitch starting from this point to this second point. Now I'll take this to the sewing machine to secure the slits, folding it in by half an inch and then securing the edges following the direction of the chalk. After securing the slits, I turned the dress to the right side of the fabric. Now I took the dress to the sewing machine to stitch the hem by folding it 1 inch in and further folding it in by 1 inch. All through. The final step is to attach a zipper to the zipper opening. Alright guys, this is the final outcome of this beautiful dress. You should give it a try and I hope this tutorial was helpful. If you are new to my channel, kindly subscribe, share and like my tutorial. Thank you for watching to the very end.